The desert sun was high, shining its hot light over the wide lands of the southwest. The mountains stood like silent guards, their shadows stretching far across the ground. In the middle of this land lived an Apache tribe, proud, strong, and tied to the earth like roots of an old tree. Every man, woman, and child in the tribe respected their chief, a warrior who had carried them through battles, droughts, and long winters. His name was Red Eagle, and his word was law. Red Eagle was not only a leader in council, but a fighter who had never been defeated in open combat. His shoulders were broad, his eyes sharp as an eagle's, and even though age had brought lines to his face, no young warrior dared underestimate him. He carried the weight of his people's pride, and for years, he had stood as their shield. Red Eagle had two daughters, Morning Star and Little River. They were the pride of the camp not only for their beauty, but also for their wisdom and kindness. Morning Star, the elder, had hair that fell down like black silk, and her calm nature made her a comfort to all who spoke to her. Little River, younger by 3 years, was quick with laughter, her eyes always alive with curiosity. Every man who saw them thought they would bring honor to any household. But Red Eagle's heart was troubled. He knew many of his warriors wanted to marry his daughters. They were skilled hunters, brave riders, and eager to prove themselves. Yet he believed marriage should not be a reward for charm or words. In his eyes, only the strongest and most honorable man deserved his daughters. To make sure of that, he declared a test that shocked even his closest advisors. He said before his tribe, "Whoever defeats me in combat will take my daughters as wives." The word spread quickly, carried by whispers in the night and loud shouts in the morning. Some thought it was pride speaking, others believed it was wisdom. Many young braves stepped forward, eager to prove their strength. The chief's challenge was not a simple game. It was a way to show who among them could stand against the fiercest fighter of their people. Around the fires at night, the men spoke of it. "If I win, I will have Morning Star as my wife," one would say, boasting. Another would laugh and add, "No, she will be mine. I have been training with the bow since childhood. The chief cannot stop me." Yet when they looked into the distance and saw Red Eagle sharpening his blade or standing tall with his spear, their laughter would fall quiet. The daughters heard these talks too. They said little, but their hearts were heavy. Morning Star worried that her father's pride might bring only sorrow. Little River, though more spirited, wondered if her life's choice would be taken away, bound to the outcome of a fight. Still, both respected their father and trusted his wisdom. They knew he was a man who kept his word. The day came when the challenge was set. The sun rose in the east, painting the sky with gold and red. The tribe gathered in a wide circle, men, women, and children standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting to see who would dare face Red Eagle. The air carried tension, like the stillness before a storm. The chief stood in the center, his chest bare, his muscles still strong despite his age. His eyes moved across the crowd, watching the faces of his people. "Who will step forward?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. One by one, young warriors came forward. Some carried spears, others bows, some with knives at their belts. They bowed their heads before the chief and prepared for combat. But each time they faced him, they fell. Red Eagle fought with skill that came from years of battles, his movements sharp and sure. Though he did not kill them, he made it clear that none could match him. The people cheered their chief, proud that he could not be beaten. Yet a few began to wonder if anyone would ever succeed. Would his daughters remain unmarried, bound forever to an impossible test? Word of the challenge spread beyond the tribe. Traders, wanderers, and men from far lands heard about it. Some laughed, calling it a foolish boast. Others admired the courage of a leader who would risk his pride to prove his strength. Among those who heard was a white man named Daniel. Daniel was not rich, nor did he carry the fame of a great fighter. He was a cowboy who had spent his life moving cattle, repairing fences, and sleeping under the stars. His skin had been burned by the sun, his hands hardened by work, and though he carried a revolver at his side, he used it more often to scare off coyotes than to fight men. Yet Daniel had once crossed paths with the Apaches years ago. He had saved a young Apache boy from drowning in a river, pulling him to safety when others had turned away. Since then, he had been remembered, though not spoken of often. When Daniel heard of Red Eagle's challenge, he felt something stir in his heart. He was not a man seeking wives, nor did he crave honor. But he respected courage, and he believed no man should stand without being tested. Quietly, he saddled his horse and rode into the desert, toward the land of the Apaches. The tribe noticed his arrival before he even spoke. A white man among them was rare, and most stared with suspicion. Children hid behind their mothers, and the warriors placed hands on their weapons. Red Eagle himself looked at the stranger, his expression hard as stone. Daniel dismounted, walking slowly and carefully. He bowed his head slightly in respect, showing he came not as an enemy but as a man with purpose. The people whispered among themselves, some laughing at the thought of an outsider challenging their chief. Others shook their heads, believing he would not survive a single strike. Red Eagle asked in a steady voice, "Why do you come here, stranger?" Daniel met his eyes without fear. "I have heard of your challenge," he said simply, "and I wish to face it." Gasps spread through the circle. Morning Star felt her heart race, not with fear, but with something she could not name. Little River's eyes widened, caught between disbelief and curiosity. The people laughed at first, mocking the cowboy's boldness, but Red Eagle did not laugh. He studied the man in silence as though searching his spirit. At last, the chief nodded. "So be it," he said. "You will face me as all others have. But know this, many of my own warriors have tried and failed. Do you still wish to stand against me?" Daniel answered with a calm voice. "Yes. Win or lose, I will stand." The crowd murmured again, excitement rising. An outsider had entered the circle of the Apache, ready to test his strength against their greatest warrior. The desert wind blew gently, carrying dust across the ground, as though the land itself waited for what would happen next. And so, under the hot sun, the stage was set. The white man and the Apache chief would soon face each other, and the outcome would decide not only honor but the future of the chief's daughters. The tribe held its breath, for no one could predict what the day would bring. The news of the white stranger's decision spread through the Apache camp like fire in dry grass. Men gathered around the fire pits whispering. Women spoke in low voices as they worked, and children ran about repeating what they had heard. The pale man would fight the chief. It was something unheard of. Never before had an outsider dared step into a challenge that was meant for the warriors of the tribe. Some laughed, shaking their heads. "He does not know what he asks for," said one man, sharpening his knife. "Our chief is stronger than 10 men, and this cowboy will fall with one blow." Others grew angry. "It is an insult," another argued. "Does he think he can take what only an Apache deserves? He should not even be allowed to stand in the circle." But there were also those who felt curious. They had seen the quiet strength in Daniel's eyes when he faced Red Eagle. There was no fear, no arrogance, only calm. That calmness unsettled them more than a loud boast ever could. Morning Star and Little River sat inside their father's lodge, speaking in hushed tones. Morning Star's hands worked on a piece of beadwork, but her eyes were far away. "He will not win," she said softly. "No man has ever beaten father, and yet he does not seem like a fool. Why would he risk himself so?" Little River smiled faintly, though her heart was uncertain. "Maybe he is brave. Maybe he is mad. Sometimes the two are the same." She leaned closer. "Do you not see, sister? He looks at father not as a man afraid, but as a man ready to prove something. There is strength in that." Their father entered just then, tall and silent. His presence filled the space, and the sisters fell quiet. Red Eagle's gaze moved from one daughter to the other before settling on the fire. He stirred the flames with a stick and spoke. "The white man is foolish, but he has asked, and I will answer. A chief does not break his word. Tomorrow he will stand in the circle." Outside, Daniel prepared alone. He had no lodge, no family here, no brothers to laugh or encourage him. He tied his horse near the edge of the camp and sat on a flat stone, checking his boots and brushing the dust from his shirt. His revolver hung at his side, but he knew it would not matter in this fight. This was not about bullets or tricks. It was about strength and spirit. He thought of the years behind him, long trails, endless nights under the stars, storms that nearly took his life, and cattle drives that tested his will. He thought of the boy he had once saved from the river, the boy who had nearly drowned. That act had been years ago, but it was part of why he was here now. He believed life gave men choices to stand or walk away, and he could not walk away from this. The next morning, the camp awoke early. The circle was drawn in the sand once again, wide and clear. The people gathered, their voices rising with excitement and doubt. The chief stood ready, bare-chested, his long hair tied back, his weapon in hand. He looked as strong as ever, a man whose years had not weakened him but sharpened his spirit. Then Daniel walked into the circle. His clothes were plain, his boots worn, but there was something about the way he carried himself that silenced the laughter. He stood tall, his eyes steady, his jaw set. He did not bow, but he gave a small nod of respect to Red Eagle. The chief raised his hand, and the people fell quiet. "Stranger," he said in a loud voice, "this is your last chance. Walk away now and you will keep your life. Stay, and you will face me as so many others have." They all fell. Daniel's voice was calm, steady like the desert wind. "I will not walk away," the people gasped. Some shouted for him to leave, others called him brave, but all eyes stayed fixed on him. The fight began. At first, Red Eagle moved like a storm. He struck fast, his blade flashing in the sunlight. Daniel dodged, barely keeping his footing, his boots digging into the sand. The crowd roared, certain the fight would be over within moments. The chief pressed forward, his strikes heavy and precise. Daniel stumbled once, falling to one knee. The people cheered, sure it was the end. But he rose again, wiping blood from his lip, his eyes still clear. He did not swing wildly, did not rush forward, but watched, waited, learning. The chief frowned slightly. Few men had ever stood back up after his first strike. He moved again, faster, testing the stranger's strength. Daniel blocked with his forearm, pain shooting up his arm, but he held. He stepped back, letting the chief's weight move past him, then circled around. The fight was no longer just strength against strength. It was patience against fury. The people grew restless. Some shouted for the chief to finish it. Others began to watch in silence, realizing this fight was different from the others. The daughters, standing near the edge, leaned forward, their hearts pounding. Morningstar whispered, "He does not fight like the others. He waits. He watches." The chief struck again and again, his power shaking the ground, but Daniel refused to fall. Every time he was knocked back, he rose again, his body bruised but his will unbroken. The longer it went on, the more the crowd began to sense something they had never seen before. This man was not stronger, but he was not giving up. As the sun climbed higher, the heat pressed down on both men. Sweat ran down their faces, their breaths grew heavy. Yet Daniel's eyes never wavered. He carried within him something invisible, something the chief began to recognize, an unshakable spirit. For the first time in many years, Red Eagle felt respect for an opponent. He had fought warriors who boasted loudly, only to crumble after a few strikes. But this stranger, quiet and steady, had stood longer than any of them. The fight paused for a moment, both men circling, breathing hard. The people waited in silence, the desert wind carrying the sound of beating hearts. Morningstar and Little River clutched each other's hands without realizing it. Daniel took a step forward. His voice was low but clear enough for the chief to hear. "I do not fight to shame you. I fight because every man must prove himself, even to himself." Red Eagle's eyes narrowed. He had expected pride or arrogance, but instead he heard honesty. The man was not there for greed nor for trophies, but for something deeper. With a roar, the chief attacked again, his strikes stronger than before. Daniel staggered, fell, but rose once more. Again and again he came back, his body nearly broken, yet his will unshaken. Each rise brought silence to the crowd. Each breath a reminder that spirit could match strength. By the time the sun began to sink lower, the fight had gone longer than any before it. The people no longer laughed or shouted. They watched with awe, realizing they were seeing something rare. A battle not only of muscle but of hearts. And though no winner was declared yet, one truth began to take shape in the minds of the tribe. The white man might not only survive, he might truly stand as a match for the chief himself. The sun hung heavy above the desert, its heat pressing down on every man, woman, and child who stood in the circle. Dust rose with each step, each strike swirling around the fighters like smoke from a fire. Red Eagle, the Apache chief, stood tall, his chest heaving but his spirit unbroken. Across from him stood Daniel, the stranger, his shirt torn, his arms bruised, and blood marking the corner of his mouth. Still, his eyes did not waver. He looked at the chief with the calmness of a man who had already decided he would not quit. The crowd had fallen silent. The mocking voices that had once laughed at the white man's boldness were gone. Even the children who had giggled earlier now stood still, clutching their mothers' hands. All around the circle, the tribe's people leaned forward, watching in awe. Never had anyone lasted so long against Red Eagle. Morning Star's heart beat hard in her chest as she stood beside her sister. She had grown up watching her father defeat every challenger with ease. But this was different. She whispered almost to herself, "He does not fight like the others. He fights as if his spirit will not bend." Little River's dark eyes followed every movement. "He fights not to win," she murmured. "He fights to stand." Red Eagle raised his weapon again, circling slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing. He was not a man who underestimated opponents, yet he felt something unusual in this stranger. Strength he had seen before, courage too, but this was something else. A quiet force that did not come from muscle, but from heart. The chief lunged forward with sudden speed, striking with enough power to knock Daniel off balance. The cowboy stumbled, falling to the sand, and the crowd gasped. Red Eagle stepped back, waiting, sure that the fight was over. But slowly, painfully, Daniel pushed himself to his feet. His chest rose and fell, his legs trembled, but he stood once more, his jaw tight and his eyes locked on the chief. The crowd's silence deepened. A murmur rippled through them, not of laughter this time, but of respect. Even the fiercest warriors felt it. They had fallen quickly when facing Red Eagle. This man, who was not even of their people, refused to surrender. Daniel wiped the dust from his face and whispered under his breath words only he could hear. "Not yet. I will not stop." The fight continued. The chief struck again and again, his movements powerful, steady as the beating of a drum. Daniel dodged when he could, blocked when he must, and absorbed the blows that slipped through. His body bore the pain, but his spirit seemed to grow stronger with every hit. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes to those watching. The sun began to tilt toward the west, casting longer shadows across the circle. Sweat ran down the chief's back, his muscles burning with effort. For the first time in many years, he felt the weight of his own body, the test of his own endurance. Daniel, though battered, seemed to draw strength from something unseen. He thought of the many nights alone on the prairie, when storms raged and wolves howled in the distance. He thought of the river years ago, when he had leapt in without thinking to save a drowning boy. He thought of the times life had beaten him down and how he had always gotten back up. Those memories carried him now, turning weakness into fuel. At one point, Red Eagle landed a heavy blow that knocked Daniel flat on his back. The people shouted, certain it was the end. But as the dust settled, Daniel rolled to his side, coughed, and slowly rose again. He stood swaying, yet standing still. The people's shouts faded into stunned silence. Morning Star's hands trembled as she gripped her sister's arm. "He rises again," she whispered. Her voice carried both fear and hope. Little River's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Father has met his match, not in strength, but in spirit." The chief's chest rose and fell heavily. He studied the man before him, seeing not an enemy but a mirror, a reflection of endurance, of will that refused to break. Red Eagle had built his life on honor, and honor now told him he could not dismiss what stood in front of him. The fight shifted. Where once the chief had struck to overwhelm, now he struck to test. His movements slowed, measured, as though searching the depth of this man's resolve. Daniel responded not with wild strikes, but with patience. He waited, he breathed, and when the moment came, he moved with sharp precision. For the first time, Red Eagle stumbled back a step. Gasps rose from the crowd. Daniel had not struck hard, but he had struck smart, using the chief's weight against him, letting skill balance what strength could not. Red Eagle steadied himself, his eyes burning with something new. It was not anger. It was respect. He had found in this stranger what he had long sought in his own men, a fighter who did not give up, who did not bend, who carried not just muscle but heart. The sun lowered further, the sky painted with streaks of gold and crimson. Both men were weary, their bodies marked with bruises and cuts, their breaths heavy. Yet neither surrendered. Each time one faltered, he rose again, and the people watched as though witnessing something greater than combat. By now, even the most doubtful warriors could not deny it. The stranger was no ordinary man. He carried within him a fire that no blow could put out. The chief had tested many, but never had he found one who endured like this. The children whispered in awe. The women clutched their shawls tightly. The men shook their heads, humbled by what they saw. And the daughters of Red Eagle felt something stir within them, admiration, respect, and a quiet wonder at the man who stood before their father without fear. As the final light of the sun dipped low, Red Eagle lowered his weapon for a moment. He looked across the circle at Daniel, who stood battered but still upright. The silence that fell was deep, as if the desert itself held its breath. The chief spoke, his voice low but strong. "You are not like the others. You do not fight for greed nor for pride. You fight because you cannot be broken. This is strength beyond the arm. This is strength of spirit." Daniel said nothing, only nodded, his chest heaving as he stood his ground. The people looked from their chief to the stranger, waiting, wondering what would happen next. The fight was not yet declared over, but already in their hearts, many felt the truth, that the chief had finally found someone who could stand as his equal. And so, under the dimming sky, the duel was not finished, but it had changed. It was no longer a battle of victory or defeat, but a meeting of two worlds, two men whose spirits refused to bow. The outcome still waited, but one thing was certain: this story would not be forgotten. The desert evening grew cooler as the last rays of sunlight faded across the wide horizon. Shadows stretched long over the sand, and a hush fell upon the Apache camp. The fight between Red Eagle and Daniel had lasted longer than anyone believed possible. The people who had first come to laugh at the white man now stood silently, their hearts torn between loyalty to their chief and admiration for the stranger's courage. Red Eagle lowered his weapon for a moment, his chest rising and falling as he studied his opponent. Daniel, though battered, bloodied, and near exhaustion, refused to bow. He stood with shoulders straight, his eyes fixed, his spirit unshaken. The chief, who had spent his life as an undefeated warrior, felt something stir in his chest. It was not anger, not pride, but something he rarely allowed himself to feel: respect for an equal. The people waited, breaths held, for the chief's decision. Red Eagle raised his hand, and his deep voice rang out. "Enough!" The word carried across the crowd like thunder. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the cry of an eagle circling high above. Daniel stood still, his chest heaving, unsure if the fight was truly ended. Red Eagle looked at him, his eyes fierce but not cruel. "You have stood where no man has stood before. You have risen where others have fallen. You have faced me not with arrogance but with honor. My word was clear. Whoever defeats me shall take my daughters as wives. And today I have been defeated, not by the strength of your arm, but by the strength of your heart." The crowd gasped. Some murmured in disbelief, others in awe. Their chief, proud Red Eagle, admitting defeat? It seemed impossible. Yet no one could deny what they had witnessed. The stranger had endured when no one else could. He had not crushed the chief with brute force, but he had shown a spirit greater than any blade. Morning Star's hand covered her mouth as she tried to steady her breath. Her father's words felt heavy with meaning. She looked at Daniel, and for the first time she felt not fear but admiration. She saw in him a man who fought not for greed but for something far deeper. Little River's eyes glistened, her lips trembling with unspoken words. She had doubted at first, even mocked quietly, but now she felt pride. This man, though an outsider, had carried himself with courage equal to her father's. Daniel shook his head slowly, his voice hoarse but clear. "I did not come to take. I did not come to claim anyone as a prize. I came because no man should refuse a test of spirit. If I have stood, it is because I could not walk away." The chief's eyes narrowed, then softened. "And that is why you are worthy," he said firmly. He reached out, extending his hand toward Daniel. The people leaned forward, their hearts racing. Daniel, though weary, extended his own hand. The chief grasped it tightly, their arms locking together in a grip that was not of enemies but of warriors acknowledging one another. The crowd erupted in shouts and cheers. Some beat their chests, others lifted their weapons high, and children leapt with joy. They had witnessed something greater than victory. They had witnessed the joining of two worlds. Red Eagle raised their hands high, his voice booming once more. "This man is no longer a stranger. He is a warrior in spirit, and his place is honored among us." Daniel lowered his head slightly in respect, humbled by the weight of the chief's words. He had not expected honor, only a chance to test himself. But here, under the evening sky, he had been given more than he sought. The daughters stepped forward, Morningstar moved with grace, her eyes calm, her heart heavy with thoughts. Little River followed, her spirit brighter, her steps quick. Both stood before Daniel, and the camp grew silent again. Red Eagle looked at his daughters, his voice softer now. I have given my word, and my word is sacred. But you are not prizes. You are my blood, my heart, and your choice is your own. The people murmured again. It was rare for a chief to speak such words. Marriage was often bound by tradition, not by choice. But Red Eagle had always been a man of honor, and now his honor stretched beyond himself to his daughters. Morningstar lifted her chin, her voice calm. Father, I will honor your word and your wisdom, but I will also honor my heart. If this man stood for more than himself, then he has stood for us as well. I do not see a stranger before me. I see a man worthy of respect. Little River smiled faintly, her eyes bright. And I see a man who has given us hope. Father, you chose the challenge, but he has turned it into something greater. I will not fear this path. Daniel bowed his head toward them, his voice humble. I will never take what is not freely given. If I walk beside you, it will be as equal, not as master. Red Eagle's chest swelled with pride. He looked at the people, his voice rising once more. Let it be known. This man has defeated me. He has earned not only my respect, but my blessing. From this day forward, his name shall be remembered among us. The camp roared with approval. Drums began to beat. Voices rose in song, and the people celebrated. The children danced in the dust, and the women lifted their voices in high cries of joy. The men clapped Daniel on the back, laughing now, not in mockery, but in admiration. The night grew alive with firelight and music. Yet Daniel remained quiet, his heart heavy with the weight of the day. He had come alone, a cowboy wandering the desert, and now he stood among a people who had embraced him as one of their own. Morningstar and Little River sat across the fire from him, their eyes meeting his. In their gaze he saw not fear, not uncertainty, but trust. The warmth of that trust filled him more deeply than any victory ever could. As the flames rose high into the sky, Red Eagle sat beside Daniel. The chief's voice was steady but gentle. You have given me more than a fight. You have given me hope. For too long I believed strength lived only in the arm. Tonight you showed me strength lives also in the spirit. Remember this, cowboy. Honor is not in where a man comes from, but in what he carries in his heart. Daniel nodded, his voice low. I will remember. And so the night passed, not as an ending, but as the beginning of a story that would live in the memory of all who saw it. A chief who had never been defeated had found respect in a man he once called a stranger. Two daughters who had feared losing their choice now stood with pride in the future that awaited them. And a cowboy who had come only to face a test had found something far greater than he ever expected. A place, a family, and a name written in the hearts of those who once doubted him. The desert wind carried the songs into the night, over the mountains and across the plains. The stars above seemed brighter, as though they too had witnessed the joining of honor and spirit, two worlds meeting under one sky. The campfire burned low, its orange glow flickering across faces that were still filled with excitement from the day. The Apache people had celebrated into the night, their songs echoing through the desert, their drums carrying far into the hills. Yet as the fire dimmed, a calm silence spread, leaving only the stars above to watch over the tribe. Daniel sat apart for a moment, his body aching, his arms heavy, but his heart full in a way he had never known. He had fought harder than ever before, but what stayed in his mind was not the pain of the blows or the dust in his lungs. It was the faces of the people who once doubted him, now looking at him with respect. It was the proud eyes of Red Eagle and the gentle trust in the gazes of Morningstar and Little River. He thought of his life before this moment. The lonely trails, the long nights without company but his horse in the stars. He had lived as a wanderer, a man who belonged nowhere. Yet now for the first time he felt he might have found something he never knew he needed. A place where he was not only seen, but accepted. Red Eagle approached him quietly, sitting down beside him on the cool earth. For a moment the chief said nothing, staring at the fire as though speaking to the flames. Then his deep voice came, steady and thoughtful. You fought with honor today. Not once did you show fear, nor did you fight with hate. My people saw it, my daughters saw it, and I saw it. That is why I call you worthy. Daniel looked at him, his voice quiet. I never wanted to take anything that was not freely given. Your challenge was yours, not mine. I only stepped forward because I knew I could not walk away. Sometimes a man has to stand even when he knows he may fall. The chief nodded slowly. And that is why you did not fall. Strength is not only in muscle or speed, it is in the spirit that rises again when the body wishes to quit. That is the strength I saw in you. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, heavy and warm. From this day you are not only a man who fought me, you are a man my people will speak of by the fire for years to come. The next morning the camp awoke to a new beginning. The children ran laughing through the village, retelling the story in their own excited voices. The men sharpened their weapons with renewed pride, speaking not with anger but with respect. The women gathered water and prepared food, their voices lighter as though something had changed in the air itself. Daniel walked through the camp with caution, unsure if all hearts had truly accepted him. But wherever he passed, people nodded, some even smiled. An elder approached, placing a hand over his chest in a gesture of respect. A young warrior who had once mocked him now looked him in the eye and said, "You are strong." These were small things, but to Daniel, they felt larger than any victory. Morning Star watched him from the edge of the camp, her hands busy weaving a basket, though her thoughts wandered. She had feared her life would be tied to a man who saw her as a prize, not a partner. But now she saw before her a man who had fought not for reward, but because he believed in standing firm. That to her was a kind of strength no weapon could match. Little River, with her quick spirit, often found excuses to walk near Daniel's horse, to speak with him about the land, the stars, or the journey that had brought him here. Her laughter, light and warm, began to ease the silence that had always followed him. Slowly, both sisters grew to see him not as a stranger, but as a man who had earned their respect. Days turned into weeks. Daniel did not leave. He worked alongside the people, helping with what he could. He carried water, mended tools, and even joined the men in hunting trips. Though he was not born Apache, he showed the same willingness to labor, to share, and to give without asking in return. The tribe watched, and with time, their doubts faded. Red Eagle remained a proud chief, but he was also a father. He saw the way his daughter's eyes softened when they spoke to Daniel. He saw how the cowboy carried himself, not as a conqueror, but as a man grateful for every gesture of trust. The chief's heart was at peace. His word had been kept, his challenge answered, and his daughter's future no longer bound by fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of red and gold, Red Eagle called his people together. They gathered in the wide circle, just as they had on the day of the great fight. The chief stood tall, his voice carrying clear. "My people," he began, "we live by honor, by strength, and by truth. That is what has kept us through many trials. When I gave my challenge, I did not know what fate would bring. I thought only one of our own would rise. But the spirits brought us a man from another world, another life, and he has shown us something greater. He has shown us that strength of spirit knows no color, no tribe, no boundary. It lives wherever a heart refuses to break." He turned to Daniel, his voice steady. "You came to us as a stranger. You stand with us now as a man my people respect. You stood against me and did not fall. You rose where others could not. For this you have my word, you are one of us." The people cheered, lifting their voices into the evening sky. Morning Star and Little River stood together, their hearts proud, their eyes shining. They knew their father had not only honored his promise, but had also given them freedom. To walk into the future not as prizes, but as women whose choices carried weight. Daniel bowed his head, his voice quiet but firm. "I thank you. I have wandered many places, never calling any one place home. But here, I have found something greater than I ever searched for. If you will have me, I will stand beside you, not above you, and give what strength I have." That night the fire burned bright once more, but it was not the fire of battle, it was the fire of unity. The people sang songs not of war, but of new beginnings. They told stories of the duel, of the chief's challenge, and of the stranger who endured. The children listened wide-eyed, already carrying the tale in their hearts to pass on to the next generation. Daniel sat by the fire, the warmth on his face, the sound of voices around him. For the first time in his life, he did not feel like an outsider. He felt like a man who belonged, not because of what he took, but because of what he gave. Morning Star brought him water, her gentle smile soft as moonlight. Little River sat near, her laughter light as the desert wind. Red Eagle watched from across the fire, his eyes steady, his heart at peace. He had kept his word, but more than that, he had found truth in it. The desert night stretched wide. the stars above bright and countless. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, and the sound carried like a reminder of the wild world beyond. Yet here, within the circle of firelight, there was peace, honor, and hope. And so the story ended not with defeat, not with loss, but with the joining of lives, the bridging of two worlds. The people would remember it not as the day a stranger took what was promised, but as the day two men fought with honor and built respect. It became a lesson whispered by elders to children, sung by mothers to babies, and carried in the hearts of all who lived to see it. Strength is not only in the arm that strikes. True strength is in the spirit that rises again and again, even when all else has fallen.